This essay will be focusing on a director who is widely critiqued for assuming the role of God, Michael Moore. Moore was born in Flint, Michigan, and has a background in politics. Some of Moore's most impressive accomplishments include winning an Oscar for one of his earlier films, producing the highest-grossing documentary at the American box office of all time, and being the youngest person at his time to be elected to office in the United States. Moore is well known for his work on globalization and capitalism, and most of his films concern social justice and pushing political views. As a disclaimer, I do not support all of Moore's political views. However, I believe that his methods as a filmmaker are extremely effective, although not traditional. This essay will prove that Moore's unique documentary style is effective, and his manipulation of style, content, and chronology is a compelling way to communicate his beliefs. Alfred Hitchcock once said, "In feature films, the director is God. In documentary films, God is the director." This statement will be proved by examining characteristics of his films Roger and Me and Fahrenheit 9/11. Roger and Me was written, produced, directed, and starred in by Michael Moore. This film, released in 1989, and portrays the regional economic impact of General Motors CEO Roger Smith's decision to close several auto plants in Flint, Michigan.
This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. General Motors confirmed it today. It is going to close plants employing almost 30,000 workers.
Today, we are announcing the closing of 11 of our older plants.
While Detroit and Pontiac will certainly be hurt by the shutdowns, the effect on Flint is absolutely devastating.
Devastating wasn't the half of it. I mean, maybe I got this wrong, but I thought companies lay off people when they've hit hard times. GM was the richest company in the world, and it was closing factories when it was making profits in the billions.
This action resulted in the unemployment of 30,000 Americans from 1978 to 1972. This topic was personal for Moore, as his father was affected by General Motors' decision to replace their employees with non-unionized people in Mexico. However, Moore took the film a step further by going beyond exposing General Motors and also highlighting the lack of actions taken by the United States government. The critical reception of this film was very controversial. Many dismiss this film on the grounds that it is not an objective documentary and breaks too many conventions by explicitly placing his own ideologies on display. Through research, it has become evident that by breaking filmic conventions and explicitly placing his politics on display, viewers are forced to confront the unavoidable political character within the documentary. Critics such as Matthew Bernstein in Documentaphobia and Mixed Modes critique the fact that Moore does not follow Nichols' categories of expository, observational, interactive, and reflexive modes, but rather describes his film as a documentary told with a narrative style. In Pets of Meat, however, J.P. Jones states, "The narrative principle organizing Moore's film is montage. It juxtaposes past and present, class perspectives of the rich and poor, views of capital as both a private and social power, and the seemingly impersonal laws of the economy against their personalized effects. The trope of irony which organizes the film's stylistic juxtapositions does not permit a reconciliation of these differences, but instead exposes them as unresolved contradictions. It is between the positions thus revealed as unreconcilable that the viewer is forced to choose."
Of others. They hired local people to be human statues at the party.
So what's it like here in Flint these days?
Well, things are tough here for the people that are laid off. There's still people working, and I don't think it's as bad as people may believe.
We started something, and we're going to finish it. We're going to be the leaders.
What did we start?
We started an industrial revolution, an art form that's never been created in the history of mankind.
What was that industrial revolution?
The cars, steel. You know, it took off from there. You know, we invented the wheel again, you know, and we're off again, and we're running.
So what advice do you have for those who are having a rough go of it?
Get up in the morning and go do something. Start yourself. Get your own motor going. There's things to do out there.
The statement is proved by examining Moore's juxtaposition of footage from the parade celebrating General Motors' 50th birthday with images of working-class people underneath gray skies. It is evident that by embracing the concept as a narrative, as opposed to following characteristics of a documentary as according to Nichols' categories, Moore was able to manipulate chronology in order to convey his message more clearly and effectively. Additionally, Jones highlights the fact that all films, documentary or otherwise, begin with pre-production planning and end with post-production editing and distribution. Moore uses narrative elements in order to draw people into his story and make the unjust circumstance more widely recognized. Additionally, to conclude arguments that this film was biased and objective, it is evident that he never went out of his way to show this film as anything other than a bias in his own personal opinion. In the first 30 seconds of the film, Moore shares his own personal experience that resulted from the decisions of General Motors' decision, and throughout the film he never attempts to mask his hope to change the policies within the United States government. I strongly believe that by straying from traditional elements and embracing narrative stylistic elements, Moore was able to create a more interesting and informative documentary. Another one of Moore's most controversial films is Fahrenheit 9/11. This film was also directed, written by, and starred in by Moore. This film examines the presidency of Bush, specifically the War on Terror and its coverage in the media. In terms of critical reception, this film received a 20-minute standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival in 2004 and an 83% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Similar to Roger and Me, however, this film is very highly criticized regarding Moore's choice of content and stylistic elements. Although Moore is not under fire for his lack of subjectivity or use of narrative stylistic elements, critics feel as though there was too much bias used within this film. Through research, it is evident that there are people who see Fahrenheit 9/11 as a form of Bush propaganda piece. Upon initially watching the film, I was not very informed regarding President Bush's role in taking down Osama bin Laden. After watching this film, I felt as though I was extremely informed and knew all the facts. After conducting research for this assignment, however, I came to a very deep in Google realization that the facts were all subject to the belief of the consumer. Most of the truth is not available to the public. Although this left me unsettled, I decided that since Moore had convinced me by the end of the documentary that the Bush administration was all to blame, and that they were pushing their own personal agenda, he had succeeded as a filmmaker. Regardless of whether the content was 100% factual or if Moore's research was valid, Moore made this documentary with the purpose of convincing the viewer that his ideologies were correct, and he was successful. In both films, Moore choosing to include himself and his own experiences researching for the documentary provokes an emotional response in viewers. For example, watching him get turned down when asking administrations for comments on matters that deeply affected people's personal lives. In a sense, Moore is still turning Fahrenheit 9/11 into a narrative documentary again by choosing to include graphic scenes such as the planes crashing into the Twin Towers. All in all, the purpose of a documentary is to convince the viewer of a belief or ideology regarding a certain topic, and Moore is widely renowned for successfully doing so. The methods and strategies that he uses are not traditional, however, are equally as effective.